Hello, and welcome back to the One Life Podcast, where we talk about things from One Life Church, but ultimately things we think can relate to you in your one and only life. My name is Sarah Inman. I'm one of your co-hosts. I'm joined, as always, by co-host of the podcast and our lead pastor, Brett Nicholson. What's up, Brett?
Not a whole lot, other than I am excited because we are doing this at the start of what I'm not even calling a series so much as a new season in our church for a little while. So it's kind of nice to, I don't know, it feels like a fresh start kind of deal that's going on.
It feels like the year almost restarted in a sense. So
it did. That's right. Because actually the actual 2021 year didn't start so great.
Yeah.
And
I felt like here in the Midwest, if you're from this area, we just had a bunch of snow. Yeah. And it felt like Christmas finally happened or something. Like I had that feeling a couple of times. I looked out, I'm like, oh, it's finally winter.
Yeah, they go. Yeah. And it's a charitable way to look at it. Well, Christmas. No, okay. Yeah. A lot of people were thinking, man, and it got down to like 4 degrees and that sort of thing. And,
yeah. But we are starting a new season. Can you tell us a little bit about what that season and series are? Yeah,
the series is called Restore, and it was really just kind of based on the idea of what we talked about in Haggai, where God says, rebuild the temple, because the people had been putting off rebuilding the temple for like 14 years worth of putting it off. And we are the temple now, individually and collectively. Those of us who are Christ followers. And so we just decided to go into a season based upon the whole run of 2021 that has kind of battered people's souls a little bit more than the typical year has done. And so we're just reflecting on that, and we're just creating a season. I call it a season because it's really not just about the Sunday services, though that's important. We want this to be the conversation. How can you be restored? How can you be rebuilt and, do soul care kind of things? How can you just kind of get back to a healthy, vibrant place with the Lord in light of all the things that have gone on over the last year? That's kind of the objective of it. And so we're going to be talking about that between now and Easter is where we're going to hopefully have our big grand finale with that and that kind of thing. So
yeah, and I'm super excited. I think for me, like just coming in, I came in early this morning because I woke up and I was excited to just be here and do some stuff. I have some ideas for things we want to do online, and focus on even things like the podcast and having some conversations that we think really could just be value add for people. There feels like a lot of times, unintentionally, I think sometimes in church we feel like we're always asking people to do things, and that's not the intention. We want to create a space for people to feel like they can grow closer to God and feel whole in that. And so we want to do a whole series on that. So I'm excited about it. But today we have Paul Linge with us. Paul, thanks for joining us first off.
Hey, my pleasure. Pleasure to be with you.
And we always want to start out just kind of getting to know who you are. And so just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and I don't know, any other fascinating things.
Sure. Well, like you said, my name is Paul Linge. I grew up in the Evansville area, and I have served as a pastor now at Crossroads Christian Church for the past almost 13 years. Prior to that, my wife, Emily, and I served on the mission field in 2 different countries, in Ukraine, as well as in the small mountainous country just north of Afghanistan. It's called Tajikistan. And so those were the 2 primary homes that we lived, doing a variety of different Christian ministry, relief and development, responding to natural disasters, as well as doing some work in local churches in those places.
So Paul's one of the few people you'll ever hear from that has lived in Tajikistan. I mean, that's just not a common thing. So if nothing else, you're hearing from someone that has that in their background.
That is one unique thing about me. I don't have a lot of, I don't feel I feel kind of like a common guy, but that is kind of an unusual thing, at least for Evansville.
Fairly uncommon, yeah.
Right.
Haven't run into a lot of former Tajikistan residents.
Right.
That's a good thing.
Right. And we have 3 children. Our oldest, Michael, is 20 and is a student at Purdue University.
All right.
Anna is our daughter, Anna is 17 and a senior in high school. And then our youngest, Stephen, is a 7th grader.
Awesome.
Yeah.
It's a lot of different life places there for them. So you got one in college, one about to be done, and one about to start high school.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And besides the Tajikistan, thing that you've got on your resume, your current role is, describe that.
Yes, I serve as the counseling pastor and oversee the Crossroads Counseling Center here locally that serves the entire tri-state. It's not just a counseling center for Crossroads members; it's for anyone that is willing to either drive to be with us in person, or we can certainly do video or call telecounseling sessions as well. We've been doing that a lot, of course, over the course of the last year.
Oh, wow.
And that's why we got in touch with Paul, because that is a role that he's got obviously a background in this. And that's one of the things we want to do in the Restore series, not only on Sundays, but during the week, just provide resources. And he is a resource because he deals with people, in some of the crisis of their lives and the challenges of their lives in that counseling role, and not only, and has that pastoral background with a lot of experience there. So that's why he's here, and we're just going to tap his wisdom and his experience.
Yeah, I'm going to start off with a question I didn't give you. So
okay.
Sorry.
That's all right. That's good.
Okay.
But it clicked with me as you were talking about, the Crossroads Counseling Center. I think even for me growing up, like thinking of a counseling center connected to a church was not something that we just talked about much, or felt like there were always these things like you didn't talk about it. Why is that important to have now?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think even different generations view counseling through a different lens. I think boomers, maybe even some Generation Xers, will tend to be a little bit more private when it comes to counseling, seeking advice or guidance from a counselor or therapist, whereas millennials in Generation Z are much more open about it. Some even kind of almost carry it as a badge of honor that they're getting. So it's really the stigma of seeking counseling has changed. I think it's particularly important for churches to be engaged in the sphere of emotional health and mental health, because ultimately I believe that while there's a lot of very helpful things out there under the umbrella of psychology or the secular approach to this, there are some things that are unique to the Christian perspective that are deeply healing and really provide the meaning, significance, and answers that people are ultimately after.
Now, as you say that, I would like, and that's this question, it wasn't on the list either. So, as you say, like, what is you? I mean, it's like, I know on one hand, but I'd like to hear from your perspective. What have you seen that is unique to the Christian perspective that is deeply healing in sort of that unique way that you're talking about?
Right. So often a topic that people are coming in with in one way, shape, or form is suffering, and trying to find some sense out of suffering. It could be loss in the form of anything from a career loss all the way to the loss of a loved one. And there are the ways that people experience trauma and have experienced abuse, have experienced very, very difficult things in life. I believe that the unique part of what God gives us in a life in Christ, and as demonstrated through Jesus Christ, is He can provide meaning in the midst of our suffering, and the world can't do that.
Yeah,
they can prescribe some coping mechanisms, they can prescribe some medications to try to take the edge off, but a godless worldview cannot assign meaning that transcends the suffering that we experience.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes me think. This kind of struck me more as I was doing our first installment of our Restore series was this past Sunday, and reappreciating the fact that the God of the universe, incarnate in Christ, walking the earth, gave Himself the life that was acquainted with grief and familiar with suffering, and then it died. All that whole thing, and I've heard that pointed out from a number of different sources, that when you think about it, when you really encounter the truly hard things of life, which everybody will go through one way or the other, that's remarkable that's at the centerpiece of who He is, not just kind of a nice little, you'll go to heaven someday. It's not that. It's more His very personality. He walked in that acquaintance with suffering. So that, thank you for sharing that. And then already it's one of those things that we do need to remember about this whole thing of being restored.
Yeah. And when we think about just generally restorative practices, what comes to mind, or things that come to mind for you?
Mm-hmm. So the first thing that comes to mind is God's prescribed way of being replenished or renewed or restored, and that is through the practice of Sabbath. This was important enough for God to demonstrate it and practice it Himself on the seventh day. We see in the Scriptures that He Himself rested, not that He needed to, but He demonstrates that for us. And we see that also mentioned as one of the commandments. And I think in our busy, hectic schedules in the year 2021, the question then is, what does Sabbath look like? What does a restorative process look like for us? And there's some excellent work that's been written on this. One of the resources I would recommend is Peter Scazzero's Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, where he talks about Sabbath, and he talks about 4 pieces to it. The first, he says, is stop. So just it's about a cessation of activity to just really pause, and which is hard for us. Yeah. It's hard for us to put our phones down. It's hard for us to detach from our devices. It's hard for us to stop our flurry of activities. I think 2020 has helped with that a little bit. But so that's the first step, is just to stop our normal routine. Mm-hmm. The second thing is to rest. So he prescribes for us to rest, to pull back. Maybe that looks like just laying down and taking a nap. There's nothing unspiritual about that. The third thing is delight, to find something that delights and gives you pleasure. Eric Little, the runner, talked about, when I run, I feel God's pleasure. And just to find, what is it? Is it a putting on a pair of good quality headphones and listening to a symphony, but something that just delights us in what God has created? And then the fourth one is to contemplate, to think about the things of God, to give God space to talk to us and to listen to Him. So those are 4 pieces of Sabbath. As far as like a rhythm of it, I think it's good to have something that's like a daily practice. So that might be something as brief as, even if it's 5 minutes, it's good just to have some time with God, 5, 15, 30 minutes, whatever you can give. So there's the daily practice of Sabbath, or what we would maybe call quiet time. There's weekly, which is, that one day out of 7 to take some time away from our typical schedules. I think it's great if we can even incorporate something monthly. Maybe a day of retreat, or just to quiet and I know that can be challenging in the midst of the many demands of life. And then annually as well, to do something. We think of that as a vacation, but incorporating some piece of that, week away or a couple weeks away, that is distinctly for the purpose of restoring the soul, and not just like going and seeing as many attractions as possible. Right. But restoring the soul.
Yeah, I was curious about that. That how do you separate the idea of vacation from Sabbath? Because nearly everybody goes on vacation, at least in our culture, and it's pretty common. I'm going to take the kids to Disney World, that sort of thing. That's probably not what you're talking about. Yeah, especially I've been to Disney World, and it's not restful.
It did not feed your soul, Brett.
I didn't. I walked away going, okay, I need a vacation from that vacation.
Right, because your wallet was completely empty too.
It absolutely was. Yeah, that's right. My sanity was gone. There were a lot of things that
they're very good at that. Yeah,
they are.
So for me personally, I love to go to, and I've taken my family to a variety of our nation's national parks. There's just something about them that feeds my soul, being outside. I know that's not for everybody. John Muir, the naturalist, described our natural parks as some of God's most beautiful outdoor cathedrals. And I thought that was an apt description, because I feel that way. I feel like God meets me when I'm outside in nature. And I think that has a different feeling to it than maybe an amusement park does. But I think the elements of it are just to build, to carve some time in it. It doesn't have to be, let a family vacation be fun, but if possible, to preserve some time on that vacation for the purpose of intentionally reconnecting with God, and letting Him speak to your soul.
Yeah. I had a thought there. I just lost it, but I have another question. So this past week in our service, we took an intentional time to talk about lamenting. Mm-hmm. And I heard a few people even had said this. I'd never heard that term before. I hadn't really thought of it in that way. And we took an intentional time to ask people to write their own out. When we do that, what does that do for us? What does that do for our bodies, for even our souls in the moments of like when we think of grieving and healing and taking a moment to restore? Mm-hmm. What is lamenting? What does that process look like, and how does it help?
Yeah. Well, first, I really want to commend you all to make this a season of restoration. I think that's just very admirable and it's the right thing to give some focus to. When I think of lament, I think of Jeremiah in the scriptures. I think of the book of Lamentations, which is a collection of laments. And the purpose of lamenting, I think fundamentally, is to acknowledge and grieve that things aren't the way they're supposed to be. And I think we feel this. Yeah. I'll read Romans 8:22. It says, "We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time." So there's this sense that creation, that humankind, that something's not right, something's not the way that it should be. We feel that when we experience or see injustice, when God's justice is not being meted out the way that we would like to see, when people are being discriminated against or wounded or hurt in some way. So I think it's good to lament that and it's an acknowledgement that there's this gap still between heaven and earth. We're to pray, Lord, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And I think lamenting is just acknowledging in heaven, there's no cancer, but there still is on earth. In heaven, there's no child abuse, but there still is that on earth. In heaven, there's not, and you can go on, and I think a lament is just acknowledging we live in this place that is, yes, the kingdom is here, but it's not yet fully here. And it's good to express that. It's good to get it out. And we're not blaming necessarily God or people or anyone. We're it's just an acknowledgement that this isn't how it should be, and it's good for the soul.
Yeah, I think it's rooted in the truth of acknowledging instead of and I'm not a professional counselor, but my understanding is that if you kind of keep stuffing down the negatives that you observe and just cover them over, however, and use your coping mechanisms or whatever, over time, that causes you to blow a gasket somewhere, doesn't it? I mean,
yeah.
If you keep just kind of seeing these negative things, whether it's child abuse or your own experiences of negative things, and you don't acknowledge it or do something about it, something bad will happen, right?
Right. Most of us don't learn how to appropriately express emotion, and the one that usually emerges sooner or later is anger. And right. So I do describe it as it's like somebody pulling the pin on a hand grenade. That grenade goes off, shrapnel goes into everybody around us, and then whatever was being stirred in the interior of that person's life will eventually come out. So it's going to leak out one way or another. Yeah. So sometimes it can be a slow leak through somebody who just kind of has a caustic and even a toxic way of dealing with other people. Sometimes it can come out in an explosive, angry moment. But those feelings do come out, and they need to be expressed. But lamenting, I think, is a biblical and God-given way of doing that.
Yeah, so you're doing it towards him, and that kind of puts it in perspective a little better than just doing it towards your kid or the person that happens to be sitting in front of you or that kind of thing.
Right. And I think in a practical way, one of the practices I've learned to do that is journaling. I know that that may not be everybody. Some people may want to just go outside and just look at the sky and cry out to God. That's fine. But journaling has been a way for me. There's something therapeutic about getting the thoughts in my head and the feelings in my heart out through the tip of a pen that has been very good over the years.
I'm sure there's something even psychologically that like just actually putting your hand down and writing on paper is a release as well. I mean, there's something that uses a different part of your brain even to use to let some of that stuff out.
Right.
Is that something you typically find yourself coaching people to do?
I do.
In your practice?
Yes.
And all
yeah. I encourage people to journal. I encourage them, even like if we're talking about even interpersonal things, I encourage them to use a little tool called the feeling formula so that feelings don't stay stuffed in, which the feeling formula is real simple, has 3 parts. I feel, just say what you feel. About, what's the subject matter? And then because our feelings can start to shape our beliefs in the way that we think. Yeah. So that's another helpful tool just to get emotions from the heart out of the mouth in a healthy way. Can
you give an example of one of those?
Sure. So And by the way, the feeling formula is designed to use the word I and not you, because when we say you, it usually comes out in an accusatory way. Mm-hmm. And so the feeling formula might say, I feel annoyed about doing the dishes because I believe there will just be more to do later. So that's a kind of a simple example. But if you wanted to give maybe an example between a husband and a wife, I feel confused about the comment that was made in the kitchen because I believe I've done something wrong. And, and then that gives the person the opportunity to say, no, I don't think you've done anything wrong, or at least to clarify, but it's not an attack on the other person, which, when we're lamenting about about a matter with a loved one, it can often be interpreted as kind of an attack on them. And that's what we want to try to avoid.
Okay.
Yep.
So you're it's more about expressing what's going on inside of you than trying to project that on someone else. You're doing this to me kind of thing.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's getting down to the root of the actual question you're trying to ask. Like, instead of just saying, you did this, like, okay, what are you asking? What is the thing that you're feeling? And if you can put it back on yourself, kind of take some of that even emotion away from it.
That's right.
Which seems good. We think about 2020, and I feel like I just say 2020 and it has all of these feelings and emotions behind it because it's a number. But that year has created isolation, disconnection for people. And we're even seeing some of that going into 2021. I even to the point where, like, I was talking with some friends, I think it was last week, and we were talking about watching shows and you see all these people together, or like you see a video of an old NCAA game and all these people in this arena, and you almost feel like this feels weird. We shouldn't do that. Like, how are you seeing just, people reacting and responding and change, like with the way we've been isolated?
Mm-hmm. I think we are going to see, not only in this year, but in probably several years to come, how difficult it's going to be to calculate the cost of what this pandemic has meant to us socially and relationally, not even talking about, the virus or, physically, the damage that it's done. But socially, it's been very difficult. I think I have a special place in my heart for kids and students that have been trying to navigate this. I think that's been particularly difficult because it's placed them in places of isolation and an absence of socialization. I believe that, and what we have seen are some upticks in things that are not healthy for our society. We've seen an uptick in pornography usage because people are isolated, and with devices, it's more anonymous and accessible than ever before.
Right.
To access pornography, which it's a counterfeit type of connection with another person. We've seen an uptick in eating disorders as people are alone and private, and maybe not getting some of the socialization and attention that they might need. So there's just a lot of fallout from this, from the distancing and not gathering. So we will continue to see what the cost of that is, I think, in the months and years to come.
As I'm grappling with the isolation, and I like to think, although this has been one of the hardest things for me with the whole pandemic thing, is you always think right around the corner it's going to normalize, and it hasn't. And that corner has been a year long, and it's just a big round track is all it is. And so now I'm getting very untrusting about is it hopeful now? It seems like it kind of is, but I kind of doubt it. I'm skeptical. So say this goes on, and I think you hear these rumors like, we're going to be wearing 2 masks next year, and it'll go through 2024 or whatever else. So if I'm in this place where I'm still being isolated, are there things that I can do to somehow fulfill that need without these counterfeits, without what do I do if I'm still in a reality that's socially cut off more than normal? What are things that I can do to kind of fill that space that I know is of human need?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think some of it is the lack of human interaction. I think some of it too is just interruption of routine. We were designed to have some level of routine, some level of constancy. So when we've interrupted that so abruptly with school routines and things like that, I think part of it is the struggle with. We're kind of designed to have some structure in our life, and that's been taken away. But as far as what we can do, a lot of those gaps have been filled with things like Zoom and other ways to still connect with loved ones, with people, with meetings. It's not the same. It's certainly not the same. I don't feel like in a counseling situation, we do it and we're happy to do it, but it's not quite the same as being in the same room with a person. And I think more than ever, we have to be intentional about it. People used to be maybe a little bit cavalier. Do I go to small group this tonight or not? And now I think we just have to be very, even a little bit more, just disciplined, even militant about it. Just like, this is good for my soul to be here. This is good for my soul to be in worship in some way, shape, or form. And so being purposeful about where there are opportunities to not miss those. Our former pastor, Ken Idleman, used to say, we're made poorer by the things that we miss. And so that would be kind of like, let's not miss opportunities when there are those opportunities to gather together.
Even if it means Zoom meetings. Am I hearing you clearly? Okay.
Even if it means, yes.
That's my negative takeaway, because I don't like Zoom meetings.
You like them?
I do not like them.
No, okay.
I'm a Zoom skeptic. And they're there. I feel, because I'm in meetings all the time, but I feel that missing dimension. And I think I get a bad attitude, if I'm being honest, about the missing dimension. But what I need to do is be intentional about, hey, at least it's a dimension. I might have 2 dimensions here and I'd rather have 3. But I need to go ahead and embrace the fact that I'm getting 2 because it's better than 0 is kind of the what I hear you say in the practical sense.
And I think even younger generations that are more used to it, they're feeling the fatigue from it as well. It's not like they're thrilled about doing virtual online learning or virtual classroom. They would rather be in person. And so it's not even so much an age thing, but it's just there's something in our makeup as humans that wants to be together.
Yeah.
You talked about earlier, even talk about Sabbath and rest. I think for some people, for myself, sometimes a rest is being around people and being with people that I can just be myself with, and so not having that, sometimes it's even hard to rest in isolation because you're not able to really, you can only watch so many shows or, take so many naps to where you feel like I'm not resting anymore. I'm just trying to waste time. And that doesn't feel helpful in that sense.
One of the 4 continuums on the Myers-Briggs personality inventory is extroversion, introversion. And kind of the classic way to describe that is, how do you get re-energized? What recharges your batteries? Introverts, by and large, get recharged by being alone. Although even some of them, I think, are fatigued from the isolation. Whereas extroverts, which make up, the other 50% of the world, get recharged by being around people. And they're the ones that are really suffering a lot from this.
Yeah.
A lot of tension out there.
Yep.
So shifting gears just a little bit, what do you think when it comes to the whole thing of soul care? Because one of our goals during the Restore series is not just to have a series, but it's to really equip people to go forward in life. So when life gets turbulent or isolated or other encounters come, they do remember a few things about how to do soul care kind of things. What do you think are some of the misconceptions about it or the mistakes that people make when it comes to soul care? Is that fair to ask?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question. I think kind of the first thing that comes to mind, Brett, is just neglect. I think we can be quick to just neglect our soul, our emotions as something that needs to be cared for. We can be conscientious about diet, nutrition, exercise, even intellectual pursuits, reading, but neglect this area of emotions. And we see throughout Scripture that biblical characters are emotional beings. David was very emotional. Jesus was emotional. In fact, it says that in the Scripture, moved with compassion, Jesus healed. Moved with compassion, Jesus wept over Jerusalem. Moved with compassion. And his emotion was what put his love into action. And so I think when we ignore or just neglect our emotional state, we're missing opportunities to put things that God has planted in us into action that can change the world and that can expand His kingdom. So that's kind of probably the primary mistake I think we can make is to just neglect it.
But I think a difficulty that people have, and Christian people do, is it can feel self-centered because it will almost inevitably include, if I'm going to do this, it includes a no somewhere in there somewhere. Because I can fill my time easily with a myriad of things. But at some point, to do proper soul care, I'm going to have to say no to something that's valuable and good to do this over here. And the soul care thing sounds like the more selfish, if I'm being honest. I mean,
no, you're right.
I don't think I'm the only one out there. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm just hopelessly self-centered. But I like to think that everybody's had that struggle. Like, I've got to say no over here to get to this. How do you navigate that kind of conscience struggle?
For the listener that maybe is wired that way, would either feel guilty about it, I would say consider giving a no to something so that you can give a better yes to something else. Because those, I'll just say Christian leaders in particular who drive, and we tend to equate busyness with importance. But I think that we've seen a lot of burnout and even moral failure on behalf of Christian leaders who thought that they could just push forward, ignore, don't want to take the time out. That seems selfish. That seems, and the tendency there's been a lot of wreckage as a result of it. And so by saying no to maybe some of the things that feel right, they feel like they're honorable things to do, and they're not necessarily bad, because you're right, we can fill our times and our schedules with anything. But if we say no to a couple of those things so that we can say yes to replenishment and renewal with God, then we've got a long-term perspective on this thing, because this is a marathon. This isn't a sprint, and we want to finish well. And you and I have been around long enough. We've seen a lot of leaders start well, but it's a different thing to finish well.
Absolutely.
It feels like a whole nother episode. We could talk about those things. I mean,
that's right.
I was thinking somebody on our online, one of our online platforms, we have a Facebook group where anyone can jump in and just have conversations. Something we've added this year for that particular reason, to create community and connection. And this week she asked kind of a similar question of like, how do I know when to set a boundary and when to kind of die to myself and be out there and help somebody. And I think that's such a great question that people are even trying to ask as Christians, because we're trying to figure out, especially right now, how do I know when to take that break, to have the better yes, and how do I know what that is? And I don't know if there's a good answer all the time. I mean, I think that's what we're trying to do, even doing this series.
I think God has given us some signals. If you've got a problem with your car engine, it sends you a signal, right?
Right.
It says check engine or low oil, and we've got one of two things we can do. Yeah. We can pop the hood, cut the wire that sends the signal, and go there. I don't have to look at that anymore, which is sometimes how we handle our emotions.
Right.
Or we can take it into the shop and get it fixed so that it's actually can run longer. And so I think it's a great question, Sarah, and I think God has given us signals, like our body sends us signals. We can feel frazzled, we can get sick, we can start to experience pain in our bodies. I think stress takes up residence in certain parts of our bodies, and we all know this. Like some people, it's their neck or it's their stomach or wherever it might be. So I think listening to the signals that our physical bodies send us about stress is one way. I think also just overall, what's your gut, what's your instinct? Are you starting to feel that agitation of spirit, that kind of overwhelm that comes when we say yes to too many things? Then it's time to pull back. And I think we all know that kind of intuitively, or we have to learn it sometimes the hard way. But I think just being reminded that God is not ever going to have us prioritize productivity at the cost of our souls. And so, Jesus says, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? and he's talking primarily about getting the world in a material matter, money matter, but we can also, what does it profit a whole man if he gets all of the accolades and all the praises and is highly spoken of, but he's internally crumbling, and we want to avoid that.
When it comes to that, and some of this may be a repeat, but I think it'd be fine to do that in light of the question. So as you've been on the mission field, which by the way is extraordinarily stressful. I do know that much about it. Mm-hmm. Being in a different culture has its own package of stress than also in the pastoral world, and just the different ministry serving that kinds of ministry serving you've done in your counseling. What is the one thing you kind of wish everybody knew, that as you kind of collect up all that and you could say, I've got a crowd of people here, I want you to know this about the soul care issue?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to share one that is more horizontal in nature, because it's about our relationships with one another rather than vertical. The Sabbath, I think, is about a vertical relationship, spending time with God. But probably the one thing, if you said, hey, I'm going to take away all your tools, you only get to keep one. The one thing that I would do is walk people through the systematic process of forgiving. I think unforgiveness is a poison that has infected all of us. It has infected churches. It infects workplaces. Everyone that's listening to this podcast can think of someone that has hurt them or that has offended them, and is probably struggling to forgive them. But I do believe that it is the centerpiece of the Christian faith. The cross is a representation of the forgiveness of God toward us. And if I had a magic wand and could make the world a place of quick, rapid forgiveness, I would use it. But the reality is that trauma, abuse, offense, hurt, infidelity, all the things that people come to counseling for, it's hard to forgive these things. And so, but I've seen people experience such incredible freedom in Christ as we walk them through that process, so that they can no longer have experienced this incarceration of soul and bitterness and anger. I tell married couples, I say, picture yourself driving down the interstate, and you guys are in the car, and you're looking out the windshield, and you want a brighter future. You want a good destination that you're headed to. But the problem is, as you glance in the rearview mirror, you notice that there's a trailer attached to the back of your car. And stacked on that trailer are the past wounds and anger and resentment and unforgiveness. So I want us to go forward into a brighter future, but we're going to have to detach this trailer first. Are you willing to do that? Do you want to go there? And they're almost always like, yes, we do. But so I really believe in the power of forgiveness, the power, and it's something that as Christians we're subject matter familiar with, but most of us have not been taught, how do you forgive someone from the heart, as Jesus talks about in Matthew 18.
Right. And I don't think I'm alone when I think that is a surprise answer in a way. I think of all the subjects, of all the things you could give off, that would be it. So that probably does warrant you coming back and talking about that.
Sure. I'd be happy to.
But because the how to, actually, the backstory is we did have Paul sit with our staff today at the recording and earlier, and he walked us through kind of a model of how you can actually do that. Because I think that is the real challenge, is how do you do that? Because I think it was C.S. Lewis said, everybody loves the idea of forgiveness until you have something to forgive. Mm-hmm. Because when you really have something to forgive, in other words, a real actual offense, that's a whole different thing, and it becomes difficult at that point. And but Paul did a great job of kind of walking us through a way to even get to that difficult thing. So maybe we can bribe him into coming back and talking about that. But that's a whole new subject, but worth exploring for sure.
Sure, I'd love to do that. I'd love to talk about it. It's one of my favorite topics to discuss, And I think I probably am not very good at it because that's why the Lord makes me keep teaching and talking about it. So I have to remind myself to be a good forgiver.
Yeah.
And I think personality plays a part in that too.
Sure.
For example, I don't know if you guys are, or maybe if the listeners are familiar with the Enneagram. And on the Enneagram, I'm a 1, which is the perfectionist or the reformer. 1s have a pretty defined idea of how the world should be, and 1s are the ones you want as your surgeon or as your pilot on the plane. You don't want them going, you know what? I was thinking about some new ways to land a plane.
Right.
And we're going to try one today. Enjoy your soda and peanuts. We want the pilot going, there's a right way to do this.
Yeah. And he's going to stick with the plan.
And he's going to stick with the plan. And I think so for 1s who have a defined idea of how the world should be, and it doesn't go that way, it can be kind of difficult to forgive. And then there's other things that play a part in our personality or in our past that can make it hard to forgive. Nobody that I've ever met is as a natural born forgiver. It's something we have to learn, which is why Jesus teaches on it. Yeah. And I'd love to.
Yeah, because it raises a whole host of questions that we all struggle with. Again, if you feel like you have an actual offense versus, there's the slights and the, you cut in front of me in line sort of things. But when you get into real hurts and like you said, the trauma or just real relational breaks, that they only come because of complex issues, and that can raise a lot of things in people's minds and hearts.
Yeah, there are wounds that are so paralyzing, so debilitating that it's almost impossible for a person to get the loop tape of the replay out of their minds.
Yeah.
And it just every day feels like Groundhog Day. They're just reliving the pain of them or the memory. And if they're not careful, they can even start to turn a corner toward revenge and toward anger. And that's where we get, acts of violence. And so being a good forgiver, they say, when you don't forgive, it's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Yeah.
And I say, when you forgive, it's like you take a key to another person's prison cell and you open it and set them free. So, and you become free in the process as well.
Yeah.
That's a great visual. I have so many questions I want to ask right now. But I would love to, maybe even soon, because I know there's an exercise and kind of I think you wrote almost like a formula that I'd love to share, not just with our church, but just with the community of people to think of that way in thinking about forgiveness and reconciliation. Because I think what I'm even processing right now when I think about forgiveness, sometimes when you think about specific instances, it feels like forgiveness means you have to understand why it happened, and I don't think you always do, because sometimes we don't, and it's not ours. Right. I can't understand things for people, but forgiveness is modeled, like you said, as Jesus, and forgiveness is offered, but understanding is hard. Yeah,
and I'm really glad you mentioned that because, and again, we can do another whole podcast on forgiveness, but it's important to describe real quickly what forgiveness is and what it isn't, because I think sometimes people think, well, does that mean you just kind of brush it under the rug and move on and you kind of forgive and forget, kind of the conventional wisdom, and forgiveness is not ignoring the pain and devastation. It's not necessarily reconciling with the offender. It's definitely not always once and done. I think Jesus tells us forgive 70 times 7. Sometimes we have to forgive that same incident because it keeps coming back in our minds. So there are things that forgiveness isn't, and it's not necessarily trusting that person again. Forgiveness does not mean we trust. Forgiveness is about the past, we forgive things that have happened, not things that are going to happen. Trust is about the future. And so trust is a different commodity. But forgiveness is, releasing that person to God's judgment because God's a better judge than we are. It is, kind of releasing ourselves from taking that role, and it's also releasing ourselves from the pain and the bondage of the past. And it's something that we return to often because hurts happen often in life. Yeah. So we have to return to it often. It's good. It is good. You got your money's worth right there, everybody. Hope you felt that. I have one more question on here, and I think we answered it, but I do want to ask it because I feel like people have asked this, especially in church, when we think of
soul care and improving those things, why is the answer not just pray more? Because I think people, they'll come into church like, well, that's just what they're going to tell me, just pray more. And there are actual practices, and we've listed some of them here, and I'm sure there's so many more, and some of those won't, they may not be the best fit for every person, but they are a good place probably to start, and some people may have other ones that work for them better, but why is that not the answer?
I think that prayer is always good.
Yeah.
And so I'll say
good
that.
Answer.
Yeah. However, I would say God has designed us as these complex interdisciplinary beings. So we are spiritual and we are intellectual, we are physical, we're physiological. And so there's a variety of ways that soul care can happen besides just prayer. And so, while prayer is certainly always good, it's important, there are other ways that we need to be open for how God wants to minister to us. And Jesus did this when we see him ministering to people and caring for them. Sometimes it was just listening.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was touching a coffin and raising the dead.
Yeah.
He crashed every funeral he went to. Sometimes it was, it was making, spitting in the dirt and making mud and putting on a man's eyes and giving him his sight back. So there's a variety of ways that we should be open to how God wants to minister to us as well. I think listening to him in prayer and talking to him in prayer is good, but it's not necessarily the sole answer. And it does take more energy on our part as believers to walk the road with someone than to just say, well, just go to your prayer closet. That can be a cop-out if we're not careful, rather than saying, you know what, you're bearing a burden. Can I bear that burden with you? Can I walk this road with you? And so I think that might be another reason why we can tend to say, just pray. I'll give maybe a little bit of, if I could, just briefly, a kind of an analogy. When a man will come for counseling because he's got use or an addiction to pornography, we tend to think that that's a matter of lust management. He's got a problem with lust, and there's a piece of that that's true. But as you peel back the layers of that onion, there's a lot more going on. There can be, not always, but there can be a pattern of abuse in his past. There could be just his unconscious arousal map that he doesn't even know where it came from. There can be feelings of futility, lack of purpose that drive that. There can be lack of connection and relationship. So if we just say, that's dirty, don't do it, it doesn't solve the problem, because God has made him a more complex being than just a steward of lust. And I think the same thing is true with prayer. God has made us a more complex being than just a steward of prayer. And that's why soul care has to be more comprehensive.
Yeah, as you look at even how God outlines prayer itself, it's more complex than we sometimes make it, because we translate prayer into, I'm going to ask God a bunch of things and I'm going to talk to him. I'm just going to unload. But when you look at the Psalms, laments are a good example. Yeah. I mean, there's an element to it that's prayer, but it's certainly a different kind of prayer than most people even think of or even practice. And not to mention thanks and everything else that goes in there. And I love what you said about, people. My observation through the years is I believe that God's favorite way of answering prayers is through people. It's through his body. That's how he acts. And so you'll see most of your answered prayers come in the form of conversations that you have with people or others bearing your burdens, things of that nature. And so we all need to be open to that as we kind of walk through, because a lot of times my healing can come through helping you heal with the problem that you have, because it gets my eyes off my own issues and things like that.
Paul, thank you so much for joining us today. I mean, anything else that you would add that we didn't get to? Or I know we asked quite a few questions. So.
No, those are great questions. And it was just a pleasure being with you all today. And just want to encourage your listeners to, if they haven't yet, to begin the practice of soul care. And maybe I'll just leave with this image. We're often told when we fly in a plane, put on your oxygen mask first, then try to help others around you. And that's what good soul care is. It's putting on your oxygen mask first so that you can then be used by God in a way that can be a blessing to many others.
Excellent.
That's great. Brett, anything to close with?
Well, I just want to encourage people as we talk about this and as we go through the series to think of it as process and be listening. And we're putting out resources out there because it's not just about Sunday morning messages. It's about the podcast. We've got other books that we're recommending and counseling services that we would point people towards. But do whatever it takes to just allow God to restore your soul and just use this season while other people are doing it to make it the conversation.
Yep. Speaking of the resources, Pete Scazzero's book, as well as some other podcasts, we have on a resource page, onelifechurch.org/restore, and some information, and even some information on how to contact the Crossroads Counseling Center. We just want to create a space. If you have another resource that's been really great for you, we'd love to add it, or at least take a look at it and see if it should be added. I guess we should take a look at those. But hear why that's been helpful for you. Email us at podcast@onelifechurch.org. And again, if there's been anything in this that's really just been helpful for you and maybe something you want to share with other people, leave us a comment. Let us know and share it out with some other people. We'd love to continue just creating spaces to help soul care happen for more and more people. So thank you guys so much for joining us, and we will see you next time.